Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's filtered webinar. It's personalising your learning experience. Joining us to present today's webinar, two of the filtered team. To my left, Head of Science and Content, Chris Littlewood, and to my right, Senior Sales Solutions, Jack Marshall. Before I pass the controls over to Chris to kick off the webinar, just a quick bit of housekeeping from me. Firstly, if you're new to Filtered, we're an online training provider specialising in the use of adaptive technologies to personalise content, accelerate learning, and reduce training time. Check out filtered.com to see our range of courses which can train your staff in key business and software skills and our solutions including creating bespoke training content for your company. Follow us on Twitter with #FilterWebinar to get updates, feedback about the webinars, or to send us any questions you have. And if you've got any questions for Chris and Jack during the webinar, please submit them into the question pane during, and we'll take them at the end of the session. Depending on how many we receive, we may not be able to get through all of them, so if we don't manage to field your question, please do drop us an email afterwards at hello@filtered.com and we'll get back to you as soon as we can with the answer to that. But that's everything from me, so I'm just going to hand you over to Chris to start today's webinar. Chris, over to you.
Hello everyone, it's quite a humid afternoon here in East London, so I hope it's nice where you are, and looking forward to talking to you today about personalising your learning experience. So as Alan said, then I expect many of you know what we do here at Filtered, but for those who don't, then our focus is on general business training through online courses, looking to teach general productivity skills and try and help people perform better and more productively at work. And the thing that we do that is a little bit different from most other training providers is that we personalise the learning for each individual using an algorithm. So using algorithmic technology, we take what we know about an individual and try and provide them with content that's particularly relevant to them. So today what we'd like to do is talk to you about personalisation in learning and development. So it's quite a big trend towards personalisation. We'd like to talk about why that is, why we think that trend is taking off, what the value is in personalisation and how it's done. So together, between myself and Jack, we will hopefully cover that off this afternoon. So what I wanted to start with was to talk a bit and give a bit of context as to how we see personalisation fitting into the trends in learning and development at the moment. So what I want to do here is highlight three really significant areas of development and change within L&D that we think are being driven by changes in technology, by changes in use, and the consequences that those have for how we consume training, how we manage it, how we learn effectively. So the first of these changes that I think is having a big effect on L&D is a shift in terms of who's responsible for career development and personal development. So whereas in the past then that might have been a corporate responsibility and a big part of the sort of proposition of a company when it looked to hire new staff might be their training and development program, then I think that in recent years there's been a shift much more towards personal management of your career, and that's driven by quite a few things. So one of those is frequency with which people might change jobs, which is increased, and more particularly changed career. So rather than there being the sort of set professions in a fairly stable employment environment, what we see now is emergence of new professions and the substitution of old roles as technology changes and as society changes. And so that drives this need for essentially changing skill sets well beyond the requirements of your current role. Another driver of this change has been accessibility of training. So where, of course, a face-to-face training course would be an expensive way of developing yourself, developing your skill set in the past, then the availability of training online and lots of alternative providers means that training that's available at work is also available at home, and so within the reach of many people individually, as opposed to simply through their company. And then the last driver that I think is significant is the emergence of sites like LinkedIn, where there's a possibility of presenting your CV in an up-to-date way. So a way of incorporating the less formal experiences and skills in making a document, a live document that sort of registers the development that you've undertaken. So I think the key thing there is that whereas in the past then you might have had a certificate from a particular training course that you've done through work, now you can undertake training from a variety of providers online, personally, through your job, and sort of register the benefits of all of those on your LinkedIn profile. So these drivers of this change have quite a few consequences. So I think the main one that we're conscious of is the blurring of provision in terms of who's actually providing training personally and corporately. So an example of this is what Linda have done. So Linda they've grown their business largely through selling to individuals looking to acquire skills, but they've moved much more into the sort of corporate sector, for instance, as evidenced by their purchase by LinkedIn. Another example of providers that are spanning this sort of personal to corporate training space are the MOOC platforms. So this is websites like Coursera, where there are courses often written by universities, which are available very widely, very cheaply, often free, and those have been a popular source of personal training, but more and more organisations are turning to MOOCs to supplement their L&D offering. And then, of course, there are many small firms like us who are offering training which covers both. We sell both to consumers and to businesses. So certification is another consequence of this change in responsibility between corporate and personal. So this is associated again with LinkedIn development. But for instance, I can do a course on Coursera, an online course that might take me 6 weeks, and then have a badge that appears on my LinkedIn profile registering my achievement. So there's a sort of certification brand that Coursera are building there, and trying to make that mean something a little bit more than simply stating that they followed a course. It's stating that they followed a course at a particular level, and there's certain they've had to pass certain tests to register the benefit of that training. And then the last consequence of this shift from corporate to personal responsibility, I think, is the importance of the learning management system within training. So whereas that might have been essential in the past, then the fact that people want to consume training outside work, so whether that means technically from home or on the move, or whether that means they want to develop themselves in directions beyond their current role, then that sort of lends itself to cloud-based training as much as LMS provision. The next driver, I think, is a more obvious one, which is the development of mobile and new technology and the changes that this is pushing through onto the way that we consume L&D. So the drivers here are the technology itself, of course, the fact that it's now possible through both the devices that we can use to consume training on smartphones and tablets, but also the connectivity that, so the fact that it's practical to be online in out and about, move in the form of training. And then I think the other driver is that the learning and development content here is sort of catching up with the technology. So in the early days, I think of L&D people thinking about mobile. They were thinking about how can we present our courses on this new technology. Whereas now I think the question is more about how can we use this new technology to effect great learning. And so thinking of it from the other angle, what are the strengths of this medium, what are the particular strengths of this, and not really seeing it as another channel for the same courses, that it's a new opportunity. So an example of that would be something like Duolingo, where it's a predominantly smartphone-based app which allows you to learn languages, but it does it in a way that wouldn't work on a desktop computer, because it's sort of bite-sized, game-like, and requires access in those sort of small chunks of time. So the consequences for this then, I think, are, the first one is, because it's now possible to access online services a lot of the time, then that generates an expectation of access. So I think the fact that most of the time, 90% of the time, I can access an online service means that I'm expecting that, and so that 10% of the time which perhaps I can't, whether that's on the tube or on or in a black spot, becomes more of a problem for me, because I'm assuming that I'm going to be able to access. So that's a sort of consequence for learning providers in sort of thinking about whether they need to accommodate that in some way in the way that they provide training. I think the next point is byte consumption. So if people are accessing training outside the office, then the nature of that access and the sort of time chunks in which that's taking place are very different, less formal, and generally less long. So the training needs to be consumable efficiently in those sort of new pattern. And so I think the trend to mobile pushes us towards bite-sized content and stuff that can be consumed in a very short interval. The third point I wanted to make here was it's really another enabler, something that's been enabled by this change in technology, which is that because our mobile devices, our smartphones, are always with us now, then that allows a move from formal training in a sort of one-off course or one-off event, to move more towards performance support. So meaning delivery of training just as and when I need it. So seeing training more as a help, an aid to performing my job, as opposed to something that I learn and then go off and do my job. So the fact that mobile's present very much enables that. And then finally, in terms of this overall context of trends in learning and development, then the main one from our point of view, because it's where we're focusing our efforts, is personalization. So what we mean by personalization is simply adapting training calls or training contents in some way to an individual. So we happen to do that algorithmically, but there are other ways of doing it. The drivers of this, so the first one is the thing that has driven personalization in lots of web businesses, so Amazon or Netflix, for instance. So the data from online usage means that you can do predictive analytics. So for the first time, it's really practical to know exactly how all of your users are using your training. You don't need to for them to fill in forms. You can be with them, monitoring their usage as they go through the training itself. Like I said, there are quite a few industries that do personalization that are a little bit more mature, and they've been doing it for longer, essentially, on the web. So businesses like Amazon and online retail, and there's quite a lot of transferable learning that you can take and apply to L&D. So that makes the pace of change faster. And then the last driver here is again this corporate to personal shift, and the idea that you might want something that's personal to you unless what the company thinks that you should be consuming. So consequences of personalization. So the first one is about form of content. So this fortunately relates or it coincides a little bit with the bite size consequence of mobile learning. So when we're going to personalize content, so not everyone's getting the same material, the same course or the same set of courses, the same recommendations. You need to think, of course, how that works when we don't know exactly what everyone's going to get in terms of the form of their course. So the content needs to work when it's mixed up a bit, when it's presented out of order, when it's presented without all of the preceding related content and that sort of thing. So there's some thinking to do about how do you make a module of training that works in a standalone way, and when you can't do that, it's impossible to make something that works in a standalone way, how do you make sure that people can consume it in a way that isn't confusing or incoherent? The next consequence here is the data for results exchange. So this is about users and learners being happy with the sort of transaction that they're making. So their data is helping us make recommendations. In return for that, then we're giving them a better experience and allowing them to have a more successful course. So I think we need to be transparent about this exchange, and learners need to be happy with it. And then the last thing is the sort of concept of completion. So if you're personalizing a course, and specifically if you're personalizing a course to someone's particular needs, then that has a consequence for how you sort of register completion of that training. So it's no longer, I think, the old metrics of time spent or checking off that a course has been completed don't work as well anymore. We need to move towards more outcome-based metrics, such as the incremental performance achieved before and after training. So hopefully that sort of explains how we see personalization fitting into the sort of the big trends in L&D at the moment. What I'd like to do now, before I hand over to Jack, to talk a bit more detail about why our stuff might work well, is explain what we're trying to do and how we do it. So what we do at Filtered is make a selection of course modules. So we start with a full syllabus for a given course, which is split into a set of bite-sized consumable bits of training. And then what we try and do is, for any individual, strip out the modules that they know already, so things that they're confident of or that they can demonstrate some proficiency in already. And then we also want to strip out things that aren't particularly useful to them for the way that they want to apply the training. So we're doing this twofold, two-tiered stripping out of content to try and get to something that's shorter. So there's an obvious saving in terms of the opportunity cost of the time taken to consume the training, but also more relevant to the learner, and so hopefully more engaging because of that. And how we go about that is in the same way as those big online businesses like Amazon that we talked about, in the same way that they use predictive analytics to make recommendations based on historic usage. We do a similar thing. So the first stage of that process is to gather a profile, gather some information about our users. So in Amazon's case, that profile might be stuff like which country you're in, any information based on your address, but it might also be your history with them, what you've done, what you bought from them in the past, and that sort of thing. For us, then what we do is at the outset of any learner's journey with us, then we ask them some questions. So we ask them about their job, what they do, what sector they work in, and we ask them about how important certain characteristic tasks associated with the training are. So for example, if the training's on Microsoft Excel, then we ask them how important it is to be able to analyze data for insight, how important it is to be able to present results in Excel in a powerful way, how important it is to do sort of grunt work of cleaning and manipulating data, those sorts of questions. So we ask about importance in relation to the training. Then we ask them about how confident they are at those same characteristic tasks. So are they confident in analysing data, or do they feel new to that task and a beginner at it? And then finally we ask them subject matter questions to objectively test how proficient they are. So we ask them, how would you do this specific bit of analysis? How would you apply this specific bit of Excel functionality? So we build up a picture, we have a profile of the individual that's got information in it that's relevant, of course, to the training and to their needs. And then we use that to match them or to identify similar users from our past. So users who've got a profile which is similar either in every respect or in some particular respect to theirs. And we do this with an algorithm. So we do this with, for example, a clustering algorithm that essentially groups users with similar profiles. So once we've done that, once we know which users are similar to them and why, then we can use feedback that those historic users have left us as to what content they found useful. So we can say, those similar users found these particular modules of training to be extremely valuable. And so we blend that together, and that's what forms those modules that were useful to people who are similar to you in some or all respects that form the course that you're recommended to follow. So just to break down, if you remember earlier then I was talking about two phases of filtering, so two phases of personalization. The first one being stripping out material that you don't need because you know it already, and the second phase of stripping out material that that you don't need because it's not useful to the way that you want to apply the training. So essentially this is what we're trying to do on this chart. We're trying to take each module, which is represented by one of these squares on the graph, and we're trying to assess how new is it to you and how needed is it by you. So the red square, the top right of the graph, is material that's both new to this individual and highly necessary, highly valuable. Whereas the green squares at the other extreme are already known or and in fact not particularly relevant. And so we can select content on that basis, select the stuff towards the top right, and that forms the course for an individual. In terms of what it actually looks like, what that feels like the user, there's a couple of screenshots here. So the first one, the top left, is showing the form. This is someone building their own profile. So they're telling us in this instance actually something about their Excel use and how much they need to do these particular tasks. So adding data to an existing spreadsheet, or analysing data, or collaborating with other people on spreadsheets. So that's part of the profile building phase. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes. The other screenshot shows some of the content itself. So the things to sort of draw out here are the grid of squares. So in this case, the white squares here are, that's the material that we say is filtered in, stuff that we're recommending that this user follows in their Excel course. And the grey stuff is things that are filtered out either because they're known already or because they're not particularly relevant for this person. And then the content itself is a mix of text, video, exercises, quiz questions, and screenshots. So just before I hand over to Jack to talk about in a bit more detail about why it works in our opinion, then I just want to show you try and give you a feel for the data at work here. So what this visualization is going to show is how, as we build a profile for an individual user, how we start to build a picture of the course that they might be most valuable to them. So what this is showing here, there's a lot of, don't worry about reading the numbers on the slide, but this strip of green and yellow across the slide is a representation actually of our project management course, which has about 60 modules in it. And the colours here represent how important, so these are essentially going back to this chart, the colours are similar to the colours on this chart. So they're representing whether stuff is necessary in our estimation based on the feedback of historic users. So when we know nothing about an individual, then the profile looks like this. We've got not much differentiation between the modules. We're not really sure exactly which of them are going to be necessary and which aren't. But as an individual starts to answer questions in the filter profile building phase, then we slowly start to get a picture of which modules are more useful to them because they're being associated with users from our database who didn't find some stuff useful and did find other stuff useful. And so we start to get more structure into the course. And you can see that some modules are being highlighted now in a different colour, meaning that they're more likely to be included in the course, and we can start to build a picture of what's going to be important and what isn't. So by the end of the filter profile building phase, then we've got a really strong differentiation between stuff that we think there's a really high probability that this is new to this individual user compared to stuff where we think that they probably already know it. So that's all I wanted to say on personalization. I just want to hand over to my colleague Jack. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat and we'll endeavour to answer those at the end of the session. So thanks very much for your time, and I'll pass to Jack.
Afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much, Chris. Always a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. Just before we start, if you, as Alan said, we will be taking some questions, so do send those through. If we don't get a chance, do feel free to email me on jack@filtered.com, and also you know, feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Apologies about the very serious looking photo there. Marketing made us stop using ones that were from 5 years ago, so I think that was taken just after I'd been told that. So in terms of what I'm going to cover, I'm just going to look at, Chris has spoken in depth around kind of personalisation and how we do it. Really, I'm going to look at the impact of personalisation. There's another one of my LinkedIn profile pictures, and just look at the impact both from what we've seen from a business point of view, and then also from individuals. We get a lot of feedback from end users as well. So in terms of the kind of impacts that I'm going to talk about, we're going to look at retention of information and how personalisation can help that, how personalising the training can help with actually applying it to day-to-day roles. We're going to look at nurturing talent, engagement, and then also the kind of holy grail for us is productivity, so looking at how when using personalisation to design training programs, it can have positive impacts on productivity. So before I kind of dive into those benefits, I really wanted to start with a quote that I think it's quite a powerful quote from Don Clark's blog, Plan B. It's well worth a read, really good blog posts on there. But I think this frames quite nicely what we're going to discuss today. So the quote is that this brain, the most complex thing we know of in the universe, we all have one that's absolutely unique, that doesn't like impersonal, long, flat, linear experiences. Yet in learning, we feed it exactly that. And I think, you know, this is particularly relevant when we look at learning interventions across businesses. I think we do consider learning styles to some extent. I won't get into the debate on learning styles today, but what I think is we rarely go beyond that in terms of personalising the training and looking at each intervention from an individual point of view. So when we look at retention, there's a fantastic quote from Edward Bollers that looks at how we retain information, and he states that we remember what we understand only what we pay attention to, and we pay attention to what we want. And I think that speaks volumes about learning in general, in that you know, we've all seen similar stats to this that talk about how e-learning overall can increase retention versus face-to-face, and you know, they're great stats, but the key aspect missing is how do we know that learners are retaining the right information, the useful information, and that's really where personalisation comes in. The way that we do this filtered, the way that we ensure retention is by making sure that content is relevant. So what we do in the outset, as Chris explained, is we strip out material that the learner already knows. We filter in material that is recommended by users with similar profiles, and we also build in aspirational material. So if an individual says, I want to be an expert in this because of career progression, then we're able to then tailor a course to them based on that. The key thing that we've seen with kind of relevance is that we do a lot of studies on our data filtered, and we've seen that we test at the outset using adaptive testing. We then test them at the end of the training, and we see a 26% higher increase in proficiency from those that actually take the filters. So we don't force anyone to take the filter, but we genuinely recommend it. We think it's a great approach, and we've seen in our studies that our users that do filter, they increase 26% more in terms of proficiency than those that don't. And the real reason from the feedback that we get from organisations and individuals is that they're able to learn things that are relevant to their roles. They then get to apply them in a business context. And what that means is that people are learning things that they use day in, day out. And that's really, if we go back to that original quote, that's from Edward Wallace, that's what we're saying, is that if people learn things that they're interested in, that they need, that they can then apply, that retention is higher. And just to give you another example of that, Cogbooks ran a study with a university in the United States. I think it was the University of Kentucky, looking at I think it was a biology 100 was the module, and they gave some in 2015 they introduced some personalised learning. And they found that those that had access to the personalised learning, they increased in terms of pass mark by 3.4%, and interestingly as well, that the dropout rate from the class declined from 10 to 8%, and that kind of talks a little bit about learning style preference as well. So these are results in terms of retention and impact that are being seen across the industry. Chris touched on this slightly, but this is an interesting one for us because the performance support aspect was a feature of filter that has definitely developed over the last year or so. But by tailoring the training to the individual and by empowering them to know that they have a program that's designed specifically for them based on their individual learning needs, but also based on their aspirations, if you can personalise training but deliver it in bite-sized chunks that the user can search, that they can reference, then you can really turn it from very linear prescriptive learning that sits in the background to a performance support tool that sits there, that's used actively. And we see some trends in our usage. Users will start in a more linear fashion through their learning pathway. But as they progress through the courses, we see they search for material, they work through modules that are further out in the syllabus. And this is really one of the key benefits. It's turning it into an individual support tool that is there, that can be referenced in their day-to-day role. One of the most significant benefits we think we've seen, definitely with our users, is the engagement side. We've all sat through that learning that's very, you sit there clicking through, looking at the same material. It can be demoralising. That's quite extreme, but it's not, it's not fun. So when we look at our users, we survey them heavily and try to get their feedback. And I just picked up a couple of points here from some of our users that, I'm a training coordinator for my line of business. This is exactly the type of training I've been looking for as my team vary in skill sets. And that's the critical one for us, is no individual is the same, no one's brain is the same, we all have different levels of proficiency. And by being able to tailor that course to that level's proficiency and experience, you're able to increase engagement. The way that we create learning pathways, we just present material to the individual that is relevant to them. We don't present the material that they already know, and equally we don't present them with material that isn't relevant, because we've empowered that learner to say, this is what I need to be able to do, this is my end goal, and we shape a course around them. I think that one of the biggest and our biggest objective, Chris touched on this as a business, is we want to make individuals as productive as they can be. We want them to be as effective in their personal life, in their work life as possible. And really personalization, if you're targeting individuals' specific skills gaps, if you can fill those gaps in their role, you can make them more effective and more productive. And productivity is something that we've seen in studies that we've run with clients. On average, our users increase by around 1 to 2 course IQ points per hour spent learning. And we've seen, groups or demographics within organisations increase in proficiency by around 10-11% in specific areas, so Excel as an example. And what that means is that if you have an individual that is spending 15-20 minutes a day, even up to 2 hours a day in Excel, if you can make them 11% more effective, then productivity can really increase. And the way to do that is also maximise the time they spend learning. So I'll just cover quickly how we deliver personalised learning. Chris touched on the scientific approach, and I definitely won't attempt to cover that. But in terms of kind of services that we offer, Chris mentioned that what we have some off-the-shelf e-learning that covers a core portfolio of skills that we believe are common to a number of individuals, well, the bulk of individuals in different industries, because I think as employees, we all wear a number of different hats. I'm not a project manager, but have I managed small projects? Yes, absolutely. So we all do some sort of data analysis. We write, whether that's emails or proposals. We could all do with being a bit more productive because we're also time short. So we have a portfolio that is designed to not make anyone a master of every single topic here. It's not about that. It's about giving individuals from all of these core skills the training they need to be as competent and productive as possible. So that's one way we deliver it. It's through this portfolio, and users take the 2 hours from each course that they need in order to fill those skills gaps. And the second way, and this is a really interesting service offering for us, is we can actually take the filter technology and work with organisations to understand the issues that they have, whether it's, you talk larger organisations doing 2 million hours worth of compliance training, or whether it's the fact that people need to do refresher training every year, but they're sinking hours into learning material they already know. So we work with businesses to understand their pains. We look at the content that they already have, and then our instructional design team will actually work with businesses to apply our technology, so that if you're doing compliance year on year and you have 1,000 staff doing 3 hours each per year, if you can reduce that down to say 2 hours per person by using adaptive technology, by testing at the outset, then the opportunity cost is significantly reduced. So that's just kind of the two key areas that we really look at. All of our content we integrate into existing learning management systems. We also deliver our content via our cloud platform, so we're incredibly flexible in that sense. That's it from me. Quite brief there, but do if you have any questions, do type them into the chat. If not, as I say, do feel free to email me. That's jack@filter.com or hello@filter.com if you have any inquiries.
Okay, Jack, Chris, thank you very much for that fantastic webinar. It's a pleasure to have you in the webinar booth once again to go through that. Before we head off, just a couple of extra words from me. If you have any questions, as I said, please drop us an email either to hello@filtered, or probably the better email address is info@webinarsteam.com, and that will go through to us and we'll be able to get back to you as quickly as we can. We'll be sending out the slides from the presentation in an email about an hour after the session ends, so watch out for that. And if you'd like to re-watch the session or share it with your colleagues, you can do so via our website www.learn.filtered.com/webinars. Again, that link will be in the follow-up email afterwards. We normally have it uploaded within about 24 hours, so check it out tomorrow. Yeah, it should be up there. And finally, if you're interested in speaking to one of the team about how Filtered can deliver a personalised learning experience for your staff, then do get in touch with us at either sales@filtered.com or on 0207 729 9043. That's everything from me and for the rest of the team, so thank you very much for joining us, and if you can, please do join us for our next webinar, which is on Thursday the 21st of April at 4:30 p.m, and that's Become a More Effective Business Writer. That's with our course author Andreas Luatsu. So until then, thanks for joining us. Have a great evening. Cheers.